Welcome to the day one for the mobile testing tutorials. So we're going to keep talking about how we're going to test mobile applications on various devices, some of the best practices, the entire methodology around it, and how you can learn to become one of the mobile application test engineers. So the first session, I want to focus on some of the basic concepts, and I'm going to talk about how and what we're going to do in terms of mobile app testing. We will discuss a little bit about different types of mobile applications and the devices, some of the challenges, some of the important items to do, the best practices, and so on. At the end, I will also show how you could learn and master mobile application testing. So the first thing that you need to focus is to understand the fundamental concepts in very, very simple English. What is mobile application testing? So it is not the testing of the mobile devices. It is not about how does a mobile device work, like is iPhone working correctly? Is it hanging? Is it throwing an error? Is it shutting down? Or a Galaxy Note is not working correct? No. It is about testing applications on the mobile devices. Applications that can be either native apps which you download from things like your iTunes or your Play Store in Android and so on, or the applications that you access directly on the mobile browsers. Alright, now what is important for you to know is testing these applications has got similarity of how we test different web-based applications. For example, to test a web-based application, we go through the entire process of creating a test plan. We will talk about what to test, what are the conditions, what are the different test scenarios and test cases, what is the set of test data that we want to use to test it, and so on, right? So those fundamental things still apply. However, we will have to focus to more mobile-based performance issues, mobile-based functionality. How does the application behave when I use the application on a Wi-Fi network or a 3G or a 4G LTE network? What happens when the battery is down? Or what happens when you're installing it and something happens to your phone at that time? So these kinds of different circumstances and situations becomes very critical, and that is what differentiates mobile application testing. All right. So we will still look into how we can do manual testing, a little bit of automation testing. How can we test mobile devices using remote devices which are not physically in front of you, or real devices which are actually you're holding it in your hand, or devices which are emulated or simulations that you're actually looking at from your PC. Okay, so now let's look at the two most prominent types of mobile applications. So one is called the native apps, the first one. Native apps are basically the applications that you're downloading from the marketplace where of the provider. Okay, basically, so Apple has the iOS, not the iOS, the iTunes marketplace where you can log in. You can search for different applications like your Angry Birds or your Bank of America app, or your Chase app, or your weather app, or your news app, and so on. Similarly, there are apps on the Play Store for your Android devices. So those apps that you download onto your mobile device, and then you install it one time and then you work on it, those are your native apps. Okay, so these are the applications that need to be downloaded one time, and then they can go through regular updates as the application owner or the company which is owning that application is releasing new patches or updates to that performance. Okay, and then, but most importantly, what will happen is your testing is also specific to mobile configuration, because for an app that is created for an Apple iOS is different from an app that is created for an Android OS on Play Store. So there are differences in how they are developed and how they are configured, but they have to look the same, they have to work the same and behave the same. So that becomes very critical for your native apps, because what you're seeing is different apps on different platforms. Now let's look at the next point where we're talking about the need to test. So for example, if I'm talking about a native app, like even a Google Maps, I could go on the browser to maps.google.com and look at it, or I could download a Google Maps app onto my device and start using it. So there is a download and there is an installation that is very important. Then comes your execution, where you're actually executing the tests on that device. But what happens to that execution when you're doing it on different networks, like a 2G or a 3G or a 4G LTE or a Wi-Fi or a shared Wi-Fi or an insecure Wi-Fi? What happens when you're in coverage zones? What happens when you are sitting in a stadium with hundreds of thousands of people? And what happens when everyone is trying to use the network at the same time? Or what happens when you're driving and you're switching between different zones? What happens when you turn your phone from one orientation to the other? So if you turn your phone, will the screen display also turn or not? All these things are very important to test. Then you talk about integration, in the sense that once it is installed on your system, how does that app work? If I change the brightness, if I change the mobile device settings, or if I change auto updates, or let's say what happens when the download stops in between, or your cell battery dies down. So all of these things have to be taken into strong consideration for testing these native apps. And then auto updates, are they happening on time? But more importantly, you have many operating systems for different devices, and each device has different versions. Okay, so that's just about native apps. Now what happens is, the same web application, the user is accessing that from your PC, a local machine, right? And he is trying to browse that using a browser which is installed, like a Safari on your iPhone, or even a Firefox, or the Android browser that you have on your Android device, and so on. So every time you need to load the page can be dynamic. So if someone changes the page every second and you refresh that, that is getting changed. And it is common to all mobile, because it is just the size of the screen, the resolution and the orientation that is different, but otherwise it is on a browser, so it is the same thing that they're looking at. Okay, so what do you need to test? Is it loading? What is the UI orientation, the size, and all the other common things that go on with it. Okay, now let's talk about types of mobile devices. Now that we know that there are native apps and there are web apps, you need to know what are the different types of mobile devices. One type of mobile device is the real device. This is the actual device that you buy from your stores. You start using it as a cell phone for voice, for text, but you also use it primarily as a smartphone, and that's where these app things, the native apps or web apps, come into place. Okay, this is the most important device for you to consider for testing. But unfortunately, what happens is there is a huge list of these smartphones in the market. So for me, earlier, to test a web-based application, I had let's say 4 or 5 versions of Firefox, 2 or 3 versions of IE, 1 version of Chrome, and few other browsers. So overall, I had about 10 different environments, and multiplied by about 3-4 different operating systems to test on and see how my web-based application is looking. But now we have dozens of devices and different versions for each device and different operating system combinations for them. So that becomes a huge list, and for you, browsers are at least free to install on your operating system, on your laptops or your personal computers, and use that. But for the devices, I need to do the actually procure those devices and pay for the device cost and the network fees. There is also a lot of manual effort, because I'm having to physically ensure that the devices are maintained, they're charged, they're accessible, and then I have to physically go in, use my fingers and start doing it. But most importantly, you cannot ignore the testing of real devices. That is very important. The reason this becomes critical is the fact that, oops, 1 second. I tried to drag a pen and that blocked me up. Okay. Is that unless you test on how the end users are going to use an application, it is not a complete test. Okay, so that's very important. That's your real devices and how you try and approach testing at a high level for real devices. But what about emulated devices or sometimes even simulators? Okay, primarily this is our ability to take the apps and show them how they look on a device on your system. Okay, so let's say that this is an iPhone, okay, and it has the home button here, okay, and let's say this is the screen, okay. So when you do an emulator or when you do simulators for the iPhone, you will see the screen being displayed on your system. You can install the apps accordingly and you can start working like by clicking or dragging and sliding or keyboards and so on using a mouse and keyboard to work with these applications on it directly. So that is a great level of simulation. It is easy for you to manage. It is easy for you to capture and being able to report errors. So taking screenshots or creating logs is very easy. The other thing is that it is the same big list. You still have the same number of devices, but instead of switching and maintaining hundreds of devices, I have these emulator where I just have to go and select which device to use from a drop-down list, and I'm able to easily switch between devices to test. So there are costs that are significantly lower, but again, they're not truly realistic. But primarily, apart from the speed, because the speed and the resolution is more related with the PC, right? Because they are loaded on your computer. They are not on a real device. Okay, so that is the primary difference that you would see. Now let's talk about some of the challenges, the importance and criticality of some of this mobile app testing. So what is very important is for you to be able to clearly understand the number of devices you want to test. Typically, you are not planning to focus on every device and every version of the market. You will need to understand who is your audience, what are they primarily using, and how many of them are using what devices, and try and prioritize in that order what are the number of devices and the versions that are being used. What are the different mobile OS that you need to know? What kind of settings and configurations do you want to test with? How you want to set your network and connectivity, and all of these things is very important for these couple of reasons. Number one, app sales can be directly done through so there are free apps that can be downloaded, but again the free apps is providing an additional functionality for the business backbone itself. For example, very simple, if we talk about a Bank of America app, so Bank of America is providing this because it is easy for their customers to do a lot of these transactions on their cell phones. And instead of doing it, if they're at their home, they might be doing it from the cell phone, the smartphones, or their laptops. But what if they're on the road and they need to do it? So they'll usually search for the closest center, come in there and start using. So they're able to save on human time and human effort by providing you an app on the go that you can use, right? So that is very important. But if the ratings are not good, then no one is going to download and use it. So it's very important for you to test and ensure that you have good apps before you release them into the market. Once you release them, it is all dependent on the reviews and the ratings of the users. And this is, since a common marketplace, they are very, very specific. Why did Angry Birds become such a popular game? Because there were so many downloads, there were so many ratings and reviews. People liked it, but they also started rating and people could see what it is. So things like these become very viral. Things like these survive on ratings. There is also a lot of data. This is for your shopping cart like Amazon apps, or your financial things that you want to do like your PayPal apps, or do any kind of secure transactions, like you're doing even your loan applications. For example, the mortgage loan applications can now be signed on your iPad all by themselves. So you could use your finger to sign, to make signatures and sign on a device, on an iPad and so on. So with so much happening, it is very essential and critical for you to be able to focus specifically on what you should be doing for mobile app testing. And hence comes a list of best practices. What I'm giving you right now in this session is an overview of what is going to be coming. Once you know the ground, the foundation layer, fundamental concepts, it will be easy for you to understand once we go into the projects of test execution for mobile apps. So one is hybrid device testing. You can never say that real devices or emulated devices or even remote devices is one best choice. You have to use a range of them, but you may start with emulated because it is easy, it is quick. You don't have to wait to procure the devices. You can quickly install it and do some smoke testing to see if the basic core functionality and the basic features of how an application should behave specifically on mobile is working. Then it is easy for you to shift and say that, okay, now let's go to the real devices and do some more. It is very important for you to plan ahead in time, because unless you plan properly based on your requirement and priority list of what you want to accomplish, it will be impossible to complete the tasks in a qualitative manner. The reason being that if you do not plan, you don't know what the end goal is going to be, especially with mobile app testing. If you don't have boundaries, if you have not created your test scenarios, your criteria, and your data, it is going to be an absolutely uphill task for you. You have to maintain a great checklist of repeated tasks. For example, I want to test when the battery is at 70% or 100% and charging, or it is at 25% and charging. But what is happening if I'm playing a movie on Netflix on the background and I'm using this app or as the other program that is actively running? What do you do during these kind of circumstances? All of these things, if you create a checklist, number one, you will not miss any important areas to test. Number two, it gives you a great report to showcase the reproduction of those defects or error areas and say that, you know what, here is a checklist. This is what we did on these platforms, on these OS, and these are our findings. So it is very easy for you to go through and say that, okay, this is done. It gives you an easy way to maintain your tasks using that. Field testing, like I said earlier, how do you go about testing your device in different circumstances? And then how about different settings? What if I switch on the airplane mode? Or what if I change the orientation of the device? Or if I use a keyboard or a different language altogether? So all of these things have a big impact on what you test. So creating a best practice and putting these things in your checklist becomes very important. Automation plan is also something that you should consider it. While the mobile application world is very dynamic with the devices and so on, but there are some standard functional areas that still can be automated. We will try and evaluate some of them as we go along. You could do remote devices, as I was saying, where you could have devices not physically present with you, but in some other place, in some other country or zone where the network fees aren't so strong or high, or you're able to easily procure the devices and be able to test them from remote connections. Okay, so a combination of these and many more will form a great practice for you to be able to test on mobile applications. So before we end, one thing that again I need to repeat and emphasize is why focus on this mobile testing. As you know, there are lots of phones that are getting really smarter. iPhone started the trend. In fact, even BlackBerry did, with little bit of web apps on the browser and emails and all that. But now with the iPhone and what it got to the world, there is a whole flood of every device running in that zone. Luckily, some of them have taken Android as an operating system, but many others are still on their own custom, like the iOS, the BlackBerry OS, and so on. So there are more phones coming, and they're becoming truly smarter. The applications are getting more mobile. Okay, applications need to match with the people getting more mobile, in the sense that you see people sitting at lunch and still accessing their cell phones. Are they only texting these days? No, they are doing work on apps, or they're playing a game, or they're standing in a queue and they're doing it. So you can imagine the places where they are and still working on this. So for example, if I have a long flight ahead and I have a full charged smartphone, all I'm trying to do is either stream, not stream, but play videos that are there in the system, or I might be playing a game offline and trying to spend time and so on, right? That becomes very important. The networks are getting faster. So earlier, people didn't really stick with smartphones because the 2G was slow, the Wi-Fi's were not really getting connected to it and so on. But now, with the 4G LTE and the 4G speeds, people are able to do so much outdoors that they started taking almost all the applications outdoors and using it in those networks. So there are more apps, there are more features, they are more powerful in what they provide these days. There is a whole way of HTML5 which is trying to standardize how the look and feel should be across different devices, be it mobile or be it on the web and so on. And there's a huge peer pressure. Unless a company launches a specific app on their products, they are not giving the best to the competition. And that gives a lot of pressure to them to be able to run on that race. So that these factors really emphasize that mobile testing is critical for every one of the mobile app development teams to focus on, or the mobile app application companies to focus on. So with this, I want to talk about few of the general questions that typically keep coming to a lot of people. For example, if you're someone who's trying to learn or work on testing mobile applications, do you need real devices? And the answer is yes. While you can still do without a real device, the idea of having a real device, at least for a short period of time, is very essential for you to work and be able to understand the hands-on concept. Okay. So, for example, you could go to an Apple store or an AT&T store and pick a device and have it for you for 30 days and return it back for a $35 or something like a restocking fee. So try and take those money back options where you're able to spend little time on playing around on the important aspects of it. You like it, you might as well keep it. Which set of devices should we test? Should we test everything, or which is the best? Is it OS, Apple, or is it an Android? Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It is your choice what you want to buy. If it's for a personal use, it doesn't matter. But if it is for from a company's perspective and what they need to test, it all depends on their audience. Where is the priority of hits coming to their applications from? What device are they using? And accordingly be able to structure and prioritize and make a list that these are the devices in that specific order. Question, I am new to testing, should I learn mobile testing? So what is happening is even if you are a beginner into software testing, what you should do is get some fundamental concepts of the overview of software testing overall, be it a web-based application or a Windows application and so on. And then you should learn mobile testing because it is the future. Everything these days is trying to go mobile, and hence it is an essential process of testing on mobile applications, and that will become a very important skill to have. And mobile testing seems to be very confusing, and I agree to it to a large extent. And the reason I say is that because of the complexity of the devices, the operating systems, and the way the speed at which the apps and this market, the whole telecom industry is moving. And hence it's a little complex. And that is the reason you should focus at the basics, fundamentals, and picking up 2 or 3 areas that you should focus on. So for example, just say that you know the fundamentals of it, little bit of automation onto it, but more specifically, you have done iOS mobile app testing, or you have done Android mobile app testing, or both of them, instead of saying that I've done everything. So you could become very specific into your initial entry into the market. How to know what to test? This is something that you'll get from an expertise point. But again, you'll need to treat it as a functional testing tool and you will also need to test functional testing, like a web app testing that you do, but you will also need to treat it as something that runs on devices, and how do you accordingly do it for those devices. How different is it from mobile app testing from regular web app testing? And like I was saying, that it is still testing, but we are testing it on a different platform which has different circumstances, it has different configurations, and it behaves differently. So to test it on a different application, it is altogether different. All right. So those are the important questions that you need to ask yourself. And please, if there are more questions, send us an email. You'll find the email on itelearn.com and interact with us. We should be happy to help you out. So what is it that you will expect going forward in some of these sessions? This has been an introductory session, which is giving you a high-level overview of what mobile app testing is all about and what is important for you to know. So we will get deeper into understanding some of the mobile platforms, specifically iOS versus Android. We will select a sample live application. In fact, we'll try and repeat this for a couple more. And once we select a sample live application, we will treat it as a live project and see how we go from the beginning to the ending of testing a mobile-based application. Okay, we will create the work environment for the testing. We'll create the entire reports and execute them for the testing portions of it. Okay, we will apply a lot of our best practices and practical knowledge into getting this thing done. Now, the other thing which is very important is automation. Now, to what extent can we automate is something that we'll need to look into at a later point in time. But we will experiment as we go along into that side. Okay, we will see more mobile app testing that will come. So I have one last slide that I wanted to show you before I let you go. So for you to learn mobile app testing, what is it that you need to do? You can join a lot of forums, you can surf the blogs and the world for what is there and watch what is happening in the development world. Okay, you have to ensure that you don't get lost because there is so much out there that it can be an overkill. Once you lay your foundation, get your fundamentals very clear and very strong, it is easy for you to progress forward from there. All right. You have to take a course. When I say take a course, is take a roadmap, take a training program, take something that is really popular out there and try and get yourself into it, because however be the training, they just have one structure, a beginning to ending covering it, and they'll give you a good quick start. Try and be as hands-on as possible, especially when you're picking up a course. See and ensure that you are focused on doing it rather than seeing someone doing it every time. Okay, so, and it's not just about playing around with the application. Don't install an app and play around and say, okay, I've done testing. No, what is expected for you to be able to plan what you're going to test. You then play and actually perform and execute the test. You track what you're doing and then you report it. Once you do this process, that is when you're truly doing mobile app testing. Okay, and there is nothing more important than doing a dummy project, but treat it like a real project, and that is what will give you the strength and expertise in this domain. All right, so I wish you all the best. Hope this gave you a quick overview of what mobile application testing is all about. In the next coming few sessions, you will see all the videos on this, but please visit the website because that is where all the information, all the tutorials are going to be hosted going forward. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Bye.